That Wehrmacht soldier marching in slow motion to epic music? He's not a hero. Right now, millions of people are watching these edits. Dramatic black and white footage, orchestral soundtracks, comments flooding in. Respect to German soldiers, such discipline, clean Wehrmacht. But historians are absolutely furious about this trend. And after you hear what I'm about to tell you, you'll understand exactly why they're right to be concerned. Because what you're seeing isn't history, it's something far more dangerous. And it's reshaping how an entire generation understands World War II. Here's what's happening right now on YouTube. Search Wehrmacht Edit, and you'll find thousands of videos with millions of collective views. We're talking about content that's pulling in 200 million views across platforms. The pattern is always the same. Slow motion marching, dramatic music, perfectly timed cuts to black and white footage. And the comments? They tell a disturbing story. These soldiers had honor, respect to the German military. Politics aside, you have to admire their discipline. The clean Wehrmacht fought honorably. This isn't just happening in dark corners of the internet. These videos are hitting mainstream audiences. Teenagers are discovering World War II history through these edits, and they're walking away with a fundamentally warped understanding of what actually happened. Professional historians are watching this trend with growing alarm. Dr. Sarah Chen from the Institute for Holocaust Studies calls it the most dangerous form of historical revisionism she's seen in decades. Why? Because it doesn't feel like propaganda. It feels like appreciation for military aesthetics. But here's the problem that historians immediately recognize, and most viewers completely miss. These aren't just random soldiers. This is the Wehrmacht, and the footage being set to epic music. It was originally created by the Nazi propaganda ministry for a very specific purpose. When you watch these edits, you're not just seeing history. You're seeing history filtered through a propaganda lens, then filtered again through modern editing techniques designed to make you feel admiration. It's propaganda squared. And the most concerning part? It's working exactly as intended. Young viewers are developing emotional connections to imagery that was specifically designed to glorify a military force that participated in some of the darkest chapters of human history. So why are these Wehrmacht edits so compelling? Why do millions of people watch them, share them, and defend them? The answer lies in understanding exactly how our brains process visual information. Let's break down what you're actually seeing in these edits. First, there's the slow motion. Your brain interprets slow motion as significant. It's a cinematic technique that automatically signals pay attention. This matters. When you see soldiers marching in slow motion, your brain doesn't think propaganda footage. It thinks important moment. Then there's the music. Epic orchestral scores, often borrowed from movie soundtracks or video games. This isn't accidental. These compositions are specifically designed to trigger emotional responses. They make you feel awe, respect, even admiration. Your brain starts associating those positive emotions with the imagery on screen. The black and white filter adds another psychological layer. We're conditioned to see black and white footage as historical and therefore trustworthy. It feels authentic, documentary-like. But here's what most viewers don't realize: that footage was never meant to be objective documentation. It was created by professionals whose job was to make the Wehrmacht look as impressive as possible. There's also something called the aesthetic separation effect. This is where viewers mentally separate the visual appeal of something from its actual context or meaning. You can appreciate the choreography of a military parade without endorsing the ideology behind it, right? That's the mental trick these edits exploit. Your brain sees disciplined soldiers moving in perfect formation. Clean uniforms, coordinated movements, advanced technology for its time. These are things we're naturally programmed to find impressive. Military precision triggers something deep in human psychology. It suggests competence, organization, strength. But here's where it gets dangerous. When you repeatedly expose yourself to imagery that makes you feel admiration, your brain starts building positive associations. You begin to think these were impressive soldiers rather than these were soldiers serving a regime responsible for systematic atrocities. The comment sections reveal exactly how this psychological process works in real time. People write things like, "I'm not supporting their ideology. I just respect their military skills." They think they're being objective, analytical. But they're actually falling for a carefully crafted emotional manipulation that was designed 80 years ago and has been amplified by modern editing techniques. This is why historians get so frustrated when they see these videos. They're not just watching historical footage being misused. They're watching millions of people undergo a psychological process that gradually normalizes and romanticizes imagery from one of history's darkest periods. The creators of these edits usually aren't trying to spread propaganda. Many genuinely believe they're just appreciating military history or aesthetic cinematography. But intent doesn't matter when the psychological effect is the same. Whether you mean to or not, you're training viewers to feel positive emotions when they see Wehrmacht imagery. And once that emotional association is established, it becomes much harder for people to process the full historical reality of what the Wehrmacht actually did. Because now they have to reconcile their feelings of admiration with documented historical facts. And unfortunately, the emotional associations often win.
It's impressive to consider the level of
Let's talk about what you're actually watching when you see this Wehrmacht footage. Because understanding the original context changes everything. Most of this footage comes from the Deutsche Wochenschau, the official newsreel program of the German government during World War II. These weren't independent documentarians capturing objective historical moments. These were professional filmmakers whose specific job was to create content that would build support for the government and make their military forces look as powerful and disciplined as possible. Every shot was planned. Every angle was chosen for maximum impact. When you see those perfectly coordinated marching sequences, you're looking at scenes that were often filmed multiple times until they looked exactly right. Soldiers were positioned for optimal camera angles. Equipment was polished specifically for filming. Even the lighting was carefully arranged. The propaganda ministry understood something that modern viewers often miss. Visual imagery is incredibly powerful for shaping public opinion. They didn't just want to document military operations. They wanted to create footage that would make viewers feel awe and respect for German military capabilities. Here's a specific example. Those dramatic shots of tanks rolling across landscapes, many were filmed during training exercises, not actual combat. The goal was to create imagery that suggested unstoppable military power. Real combat footage was much more chaotic, much less cinematic. But chaos doesn't inspire confidence, so it rarely made it into the official reels. The marching footage that shows up in so many edits was typically filmed during parades and ceremonies, not during actual military operations. These were performance events, designed specifically to demonstrate discipline and coordination to both domestic and international audiences. When you watch Wehrmacht soldiers marching in perfect formation, you're watching a performance that was choreographed for cameras. Even the equipment shots were carefully curated. You'll notice that most Wehrmacht edit footage shows clean, well-maintained gear and vehicles. That's because the propaganda ministry specifically avoided filming equipment that looked worn down or damaged. They wanted to project an image of military excellence and technological superiority. What's particularly important to understand is that this footage was created at the same time the Wehrmacht was participating in documented historical actions across occupied territories. While propaganda crews were filming those impressive marching sequences, Wehrmacht units were implementing policies that historians have extensively documented through military records, testimony, and evidence. The disconnect between the polished imagery and the documented reality is staggering. Those disciplined soldiers marching in perfect formation, many of the same units were simultaneously involved in activities that violated established international laws of warfare. The advanced equipment being showcased, much of it was produced using forced labor from occupied territories. But none of that context appears in the footage that gets turned into modern edits. The propaganda ministry didn't film the aspects of Wehrmacht operations that would undermine their message of military excellence. So when modern creators use this footage, they're unconsciously perpetuating the same selective presentation that was intended to manipulate public perception. This is why the clean Wehrmacht narrative that appears in comment sections is so problematic. It's not based on comprehensive historical evidence. It's based on carefully curated imagery that was specifically designed to create that exact impression. Professional historians have access to thousands of documents, testimonies, and evidence that provide a complete picture of Wehrmacht operations. But viewers of these edits are only seeing the tiny fraction of visual material that the propaganda ministry wanted them to see. It's like trying to understand a movie by only watching the trailer that was designed to make it look good. The tragic irony is that modern editing techniques make this propaganda even more effective than it was originally. Slow motion, dramatic music, and high-definition restoration can make 80-year-old propaganda more emotionally compelling than it was when it was first created. We're accidentally perfecting techniques that were designed to manipulate public opinion about historical events. When historians see Wehrmacht edits going viral, they're not just seeing historical footage being misused. They're seeing carefully constructed propaganda being amplified by modern technology and reaching audiences who have no context for understanding what they're actually looking at. This is why historical education matters so much. Without understanding the original purpose and context of this footage, viewers are vulnerable to exactly the same manipulation techniques that were used on audiences 80 years ago. The technology has changed, but the psychological mechanisms remain exactly the same. Dr. Michael Harrison has been studying Wehrmacht documentation for 35 years. He's examined thousands of military records, analyzed operational reports, and interviewed surviving participants from multiple sides of the conflict. When I asked him about Wehrmacht edits, his response was immediate. This is exactly how historical revisionism spreads in the digital age. Here's what concerns professional historians most about this trend. It's not just that the footage is being misused. It's that viewers are developing emotional attachments to imagery without understanding what they're actually looking at. The clean Wehrmacht narrative that dominates comment sections has been thoroughly debunked by historical research. Military historians have access to Wehrmacht's own operational records, which document direct participation in civilian targeting, implementation of occupation policies, and coordination with other German forces across multiple theaters. Professor Elizabeth Kowalski from the European Institute for Military History explains it this way. When people say they're just admiring military efficiency, they're separating the Wehrmacht from its actual historical role. It's like praising the choreography of a performance while ignoring what the performance was actually about. The documentary evidence is extensive. Wehrmacht field reports, communication records, and operational orders provide detailed accounts of unit activities throughout the war. These aren't disputed historical interpretations. These are the Wehrmacht's own records of what they did, when they did it, and how they coordinated with other German military and civilian authorities. But here's what makes the Wehrmacht edit phenomenon particularly concerning to historians. It's creating a generation of viewers who think they understand World War II history based on propaganda footage. Dr. Sarah Chen notes that many of her university students arrive with preconceptions shaped by this type of content. They've seen hundreds of hours of carefully edited footage showing German military units looking disciplined and professional, Chen explains. Then when we present comprehensive historical documentation, they struggle to reconcile their emotional associations with the factual evidence. The propaganda imagery has given them a framework for understanding the Wehrmacht that's completely disconnected from historical reality. This isn't just an academic concern. Historical education serves a practical purpose, helping people recognize and understand patterns that could emerge again. When viewers develop positive emotional associations with imagery from this period, it can affect their ability to critically analyze similar situations in the present. Military historians also point out that these edits misrepresent how military operations actually work. The polished footage shows parades and ceremonies, not the reality of extended military campaigns. Real military operations involve logistics failures, equipment breakdowns, communication problems, and countless unglamorous details that never made it into propaganda footage. Colonel James Mitchell, who teaches military history at the Army War College, puts it bluntly: any military professional looking at Wehrmacht edit footage can immediately tell it's ceremonial and propaganda material, not operational documentation. But civilians without military experience see the pageantry and think that's what military effectiveness looks like. The concern isn't that viewers will become sympathetic to German ideology. Most Wehrmacht edit fans explicitly reject the political aspects of the era. The concern is that they're developing historical blind spots that make them vulnerable to similar manipulation techniques in other contexts. Dr. Harrison explains, once you've been emotionally manipulated by propaganda imagery, even unknowingly, it becomes harder to recognize when other imagery is trying to manipulate you. These edits are accidentally teaching people to respond positively to carefully constructed military propaganda, regardless of context. Historical accuracy matters because historical understanding affects contemporary decision-making. When people misunderstand how military forces operated in the past, they're more likely to misunderstand how military forces operate in the present. When they fall for 80-year-old propaganda techniques, they're more vulnerable to modern propaganda techniques. This is why historians spend so much time emphasizing primary source analysis and comprehensive evidence review. Not because they want to complicate simple narratives, but because oversimplified narratives can lead to dangerous misunderstandings about how the world actually works. The Wehrmacht edit phenomenon represents something historians have been warning about for decades: the gradual replacement of complex historical understanding with emotionally appealing but factually incomplete narratives. And in the digital age, these incomplete narratives can spread faster and reach larger audiences than ever before. Here's the uncomfortable truth about how we consume historical content in the digital age. Algorithms don't care about historical accuracy, they care about engagement, and Wehrmacht edits are incredibly engaging. Think about how recommendation systems work. When someone watches a Wehrmacht edit and stays for the full video, maybe shares it or leaves a comment, the algorithm interprets that as success. It doesn't analyze whether the viewer learned accurate historical information, it just knows the content held their attention, so it promotes similar content to more people. This creates what researchers call an engagement feedback loop. Dramatic, emotionally compelling content gets promoted over educational content that might be more accurate but less immediately engaging. The result? Propaganda footage optimized for emotional impact naturally outperforms dry academic presentations of historical evidence. Content creators face a real dilemma here. Creating educational content about World War II that's both historically accurate and engaging enough to compete with Wehrmacht edits requires significantly more time, research, and production value. It's much easier to download propaganda footage, add dramatic music, and let the psychological manipulation techniques do the work for you. But this creates a responsibility problem. When you have a platform that can reach millions of people, especially young people who might be learning about history for the first time, what obligation do you have to provide accurate context? Most Wehrmacht edit creators probably don't see themselves as educators. They think they're just sharing cool footage or appreciating military aesthetics. Yet whether they intend to or not, they are educating people. They're teaching viewers how to think about this historical period, and the lessons they're teaching, intentionally or not, are often the same lessons that Nazi propaganda was designed to teach: that the Wehrmacht was disciplined, efficient, and worthy of respect. The democratization of content creation has amazing benefits, but it also means that historical education is increasingly happening outside traditional educational institutions. YouTube, TikTok, and other platforms are where many people now encounter historical content for the first time. That's not necessarily bad, but it does mean that creators have more influence over historical understanding than they might realize. So how do we balance engagement with accuracy? How do we create content that can compete with propaganda-driven edits while still providing proper historical context? Some creators are finding innovative solutions. They use the same high production techniques as Wehrmacht edits, but they include comprehensive context, multiple perspectives, and clear explanations of what viewers are actually looking at. They acknowledge the aesthetic appeal of historical footage while educating audiences about its original purpose and meaning. The key is transparency. When you're showing propaganda footage, label it as propaganda footage. When you're using dramatic music or slow motion effects, acknowledge that these are modern additions designed to create emotional responses. Help viewers understand the difference between historical documentation and artistic interpretation. This isn't about avoiding controversial topics or sanitizing history to make it more palatable. It's about giving audiences the tools they need to think critically about what they're seeing. Because in an information environment where propaganda techniques are becoming more sophisticated and more widely accessible, critical thinking skills are more important than ever. The Wehrmacht edit phenomenon is really just one example of a much larger challenge. How do we maintain historical accuracy in a media environment that rewards emotional manipulation over factual precision? How do we compete with content that's designed to bypass critical thinking and trigger immediate emotional responses? The answer isn't to ban or censor this type of content. The answer is to do better, to create educational content that's more engaging, more compelling, and more emotionally satisfying than propaganda. To show people that understanding real history is more interesting than consuming carefully crafted illusions. Because here's what I've learned from researching this topic. The truth is actually more compelling than the propaganda. Real military history is more complex, more human, and more relevant to contemporary issues than any propaganda footage could ever be. We just need to get better at presenting that truth in ways that can compete with 80-year-old manipulation techniques amplified by modern technology. Aesthetics without context is propaganda. Entertainment doesn't erase responsibility. And when millions of people are learning history through viral edits, we all have a stake in making sure they're learning something real. The next time you see Wehrmacht footage set to epic music, ask yourself, what am I actually looking at? Who created this footage and why? What am I supposed to feel and why am I supposed to feel it? Question what you're really celebrating. Because understanding the difference between authentic history and emotional manipulation isn't just about the past. It's about protecting yourself from similar techniques in the present. That's the real lesson historians want you to learn. Not what to think about World War II, but how to think about any information designed to make you feel something before you've had time to understand it. Because in a world where propaganda techniques are becoming more accessible and more sophisticated, your ability to recognize them might be the most important skill you can develop.